Hi, I'm Ari, I'm the Oak Witch, and in today's video let's discuss the way we approach books. So I wanted to do a little sit down video today because honestly I've just come back from a week at my mum's. It was so lovely. We went occult book shopping in London. That was fabulous. And honestly, I hadn't really got a script for this video. I just wanted to sit down and have a little discussion. So that's what this video is. To be fair, this is something which I've wanted to talk about for a while now. Pretty much each time I make any video related about books, and it's something which I've seen Thorn Mooney discuss as well in her book and The Witch's Path, which is very good by the way, and on her channel as well. And I think that it's something which I wanted to explore here as well, since I talk about books quite a lot. So it's pretty drilled into our community that we need to research and we need to read books. It's something which I think we can sort of generally agree that we need to read in order to learn, in order to absorb knowledge and know what we're doing to practice magic, to explore different things. We sort of have this consensus that we need to do it. And honestly, I still encounter spirituality spaces where this isn't something which people think of straight away. And I don't even say this in a derogatory sense. An example I had was talking to someone about spirituality, and they start talking about the concept of reality shifting. And reality shifting and shift talk is not my flavour of tea, and I'll leave it at that. But when this person was talking about it, I was genuinely curious as to sort of what research they had sort of found for this. I'd love to sort of hear their resources. And I said this out of genuine curiosity because I just wanted to see what they were reading, and they couldn't provide me with any resources. And this isn't a aha moment, you know, but it is one which concerned me because there is a danger in these spirituality spaces where you can absorb information which is actually quite damaging, actually quite bypassing of mental health conditions. This is something that is important to consider, hence why we always stress the concept of researching, of finding good, trusted and vetted resources. And this takes time to learn how to do this, but it is something which is important in this process of research. And many people sort of, you know, allude to the fact that being a witch is being a student forever. You never really stop being a student. And it is so true, you know. I don't think people sort of realise the severity as to why it's important. I think when someone's constantly tell you to do something, you can get a bit like, oh, it's a bit like a chore. But there is reasons why researching is important. It's to make sure that the information you're absorbing, because, you know, as humans, we are like sponges. We absorb things all the time from our environment. Be this just passively or, you know, through our social environment, through any psychological sense, or through direct experiences. And through things like reading and research, we absorb like a sponge. So we have to make sure that when we're on the path of the occult, of any sort of spirituality, what we're researching is not potentially harmful for us. I think it's important to consider that the spaces that we're in, these spirituality spaces, be they on Shift Talk or any sort of Discord community, make sure that they have their resources and you can go back and read further from trusted sources yourself, and you're not just taking someone's word for it. That's just one example, but I hope that you sort of see how that can extrapolate to multiple different topics, multiple different contexts. So when we get into this concept of needing to research, needing to read books, in our community this is quite a given thing. And now I feel like I also come across this idea of how we actually review books and how we recommend them to other people. Sometimes I don't think it's always fair, and again, this is something which, like I said, Thorn Mooney has discussed in her book Witch's Path and in her channel. I wanted to talk about it because I see it quite a lot. I see it where someone sort of talks about a witchcraft book and says, oh, but you know, it's Wicca, therefore, you know, they don't actually recommend it. But I don't sort of see why that's a bad thing, because Wicca is still a form of witchcraft. So I think it's about being critical enough to establish what are clearly the Wiccan influences and what are clearly general witchcraft, and you can still apply that to your own witchcraft. But I guess I do see why, if people want to step away from any sort of Wiccan sources, but I think people treat Wicca as if it's a really dirty word. Another thing I see, I guess, is people who are perhaps more advanced or a bit more experienced, and the way that they treat beginner books. If you are a more experienced practitioner and you are reading a 101 book or like a witchcraft guide that is obviously written in format and structure for a beginner, and you leave it a bad review if it's not challenging enough for you, or it's too simple, or doesn't go into depth about things, I feel like that's not fair to do that for, because it's not a book for you. The book isn't for you. When I see experienced practitioners get mad at these like beginner books for say the same thing over and over again, well, yeah, because they're not meant to be read by people like you. They're meant to be read by people who are beginners. So I think it's getting to this mindset, and it's something which I spoke about on my last Let's Discuss, having that advanced mindset and the way we can utilize these books to actually approach it from a different perspective. I think when you let go of that perhaps ego-driven, like, oh, I'm too good to learn from these beginner, really simple sources, I think you can actually have some really rich experiences from letting that go. But yes, this all ties into how we approach and how we review books. If there's any people who are complete beginners, and I come across them quite a lot, and they want a really simple book like that, I don't think anyone really wants to start off with things like Ronald Hutton. Like, I don't think anyone really wants to start off with that. That's very overwhelming. That's very daunting. Ronald Hutton is great, and when someone asks me a book on the Wheel of the Year, I think I would be hesitant to recommend this straight away. Look at how dense that is. I haven't even finished this myself. I've read chapters and I do think he's great, but it's overwhelming and it's not beginner friendly. Like, I think anyone who wants, like, if anyone's asking for like history on the festivals, I will probably refer to them with the disclaimer that it's quite a dense book. But I'll usually go for a book like this, which is pretty and it's suitable for a younger audience because it's got lovely illustrations inside. She's got quite simplistic language and really nice ideas for celebration that a beginner wants to read. So it's about approaching these books differently. And I think something which I sort of said when referring to the Ronald Hutton book, something which I think might comfort maybe beginners as well, is that I have read through quite a lot of books on this bookshelf. I haven't finished every book on this bookshelf, but I have gone through quite a lot of them. For example, Magical House Protection by Brian Hoggard. I loved the chapters that I read of this. I haven't finished it, but I've read chapters and I have researched specific things using this book. So I've read and used this book for research, but I haven't finished this book. And that's okay to do. That is very okay to do for your practice, to help you research specific topics, to dip in and out of books as you please, if that helps you. Some people obviously really don't like to do this. Some people really need to do from A to Z, and I get that if that's your thing. You don't have to fully finish a book each time you pick it up. You can dip in and out of books. I think obviously the skill of a book and how you can tell whether it's a useful book is the way in which they educate their information they are trying to portray, how it comes across, how digestible it is to the reader, and how they can learn from you in this way. I think that we should be reviewing books based on what the book intends to actually do in the first place. Going back to this idea of if you're more experienced and you're expecting a book to be fitting to your standards, but if you're reading a beginner book, they're never going to fit your standards because you're way more experienced than these beginner books. So when we're getting to these really unfair reviews, you see them all the time on Amazon and Goodreads. People giving like 2 stars or 1 stars based on the fact that it's too simple or it's like not enough information or blah blah blah. It doesn't go into depth, it's not historical, it's not scholarly. But if it's not a scholarly piece of text, if it's not a history book, then I think that sometimes you need to think about what the book actually intends to do and what is the target audience. If you're not a part of that target audience, then again, that's something to consider when you're reviewing a book. And I bring this up because ratings and reviews can actually really help or hinder our authors in our community. So on the flip side of this, I guess if you're a beginner and if you're trying to go through reviews, what might be worth looking at is reviews that are quite meaty and explain why they are knocking down stars or why they don't recommend it and the context to which they think this and how they relate it to the purpose of the book. I think that's when you find a more critical analysis of why a book is bad or why they don't recommend a book. I think that is far more helpful when we're getting to this idea of community, recommending books, reviewing books, and yeah, just generally helping others in this sense of research. Another thing I think I see more researched people, or more just experienced people in general do, is get mad at a witchcraft book for being framed in a specific tradition. I think what's important to consider is that a writer or author will speak from their experience. That's all they can do. You do get some books which are meant to sort of be written from multiple perspectives, right? But usually when you find like 101 guidebooks, they're written from the author's perspective. And the author's perspective is obviously biased to a specific tradition, their experience of witchcraft. Because again, we should consider that witchcraft occult is very broad. There are many different traditions and sub-traditions. And the way someone advances in their craft is specializing into a specific topic or specific tradition and such. So obviously you're gonna get a little bit of bias when you're reading a 101 book, and I think that's important to consider. But I think it's also important to consider books, like with most sort of forms of media, like videos, for example. These videos, they're a snapshot in time. A book is written by someone during a specific period in their life, and for example, these videos I'm making right now, I'm filming this in a specific point in my life. So specifically relating this to witchcraft, I've made videos in the past where I give advice, which at the time, it made sense to me. At the time I was like, yeah, I think this. And now upon reflection, I have changed my perspective. And I see that personally as a good thing. I'm growing, I'm learning, and I'm moving forward in my journey, in my path. And I don't see that as a bad thing. But I guess what's important to consider is that that video is a snapshot in time. That's me then, and this currently is me now. So I think we should also afford the same courtesy to books sometimes. One book about witchcraft by an author is that from their perspective, and another book on witchcraft by a different author will be a different perspective. And when we talk about these witchcraft guides, these 101s, it's worth considering that they're obviously going to come from a particular person's perspective. Let's use some examples, because talking about books is always fun. So some books I recommended before my channel, some books I've recently read and haven't talked about yet. 6 Ways by Aidan Watcher. This is a great guide to magic in sort of a 101 sort of style, but it comes from a very sort of animistic and chaos magic perspective, because that's the author's background. Is that type of magic objective and applicable to everyone? Some people aren't animists and some people aren't chaos magicians, but you can still learn so much from this book despite the author's personal approach to magic and his magical path. Folk Witchcraft by Roger J. Horn. His type of witchcraft. This is a 101 sort of style book, but his background obviously comes from Scottish and Appalachian folk magic, and you can clearly see that there. But this is still a really useful book in its format and its structure, despite the author's experience that you can clearly see throughout the book. Psychic Witch by Matt Oren. The exercises alone are amazing in this book, great for beginners, and hence why it's so recommended so well. But obviously his background is Black Rose Witchcraft and Sacred Fire's tradition of witchcraft. I think you do see that obviously in the theory that he talks about. Is this applicable to witches all across the globe? No, but still interesting to read, and the exercises are actually quite good for beginner witches stepping into the craft. but you can clearly see his experience and his perspective in this book, and this book is still, I would say, a decent book for beginners. Frankie Castaneda, as you will probably know them as Chaotic Witch Aunt, released this, and honestly, I think it's quite a good beginner book. I will maybe talk about it in a video or in a Patreon review video. You can clearly see their experience in this book, but I do think that as someone who is stepping into the craft, it's still really good. You still get a good guide despite seeing someone's experience. And another example of a one-on-one book where you can clearly see the experience the author has and their personal perspective, but it doesn't mean that the book is hindered for it, is Witchery by Juliet Diaz. Now, Juliet Diaz is Cuban and indigenous, and you can see that sort of influence throughout the book as she relays from her experiences. Now, the only thing I didn't like about this book was the fact that it doesn't have a bibliography. But the actual content of the book is quite sweet. It's definitely for a beginner audience, and I think if you pick up this book as a beginner, you know, it's quite sweet. There's quite a lot of nice spell ideas in here. And yeah, I think this is a great start. It's important to consider that, like, if you're an absolute beginner, if you're literally don't know anything about witchcraft and you just want something that's digestible, easy to read, has maybe some cute spell ideas to get a sort of flavour for what witchcraft is in the modern world, then I'm not sure you'll really be doing a lot of like deep diving research straight away. I think that's a little bit unrealistic. I think you're probably gonna pick up something which is quite fun, and then as you get more into it, if it does spark your interest, then I guess you'll want to be doing more research. You'll start your research process. You'll start looking at trusted, vetted resources. If you can obviously start with one, that's great. Hence why we have channels like this to point you into right directions. I still would have liked a bibliography in this book, but I'm using it as an example because one, I don't think the content of this book is bad, and you can also see her experience flow throughout this book, making it actually a more enriching read. It's quite nice to read, as you can see her experience as she relays tales from, you know, her sort of hereditary background. It's quite nice. So when you look at all of these books, these guides, these 101s, they are all obviously going to have the author's perspective, their background, their experience flow throughout the text, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing. So why do we say things like, oh, it's a Wiccan book though? The author is obviously going to have a specific background. They're obviously going to be, if they're Wiccan, that might translate into their writing because they are Wiccan. That's their experience and that's the education they are providing to you. This is why I bring this up, because I want to perhaps identify this. Have you guys come across this before? I feel like I have. I've heard other practitioners talk about this, and I just wanted to open this discussion as to how we approach these books, how we review them, how we treat them, and the expectations we hold them to, whether or not that's fair. And yeah, I think now I'm officially done talking. For someone who didn't have a script for this video, I've ended up going on massive rambles, so that's great. I'll see what this looks like in editing. But yeah, I really thank you for watching. I've now reached 6,000 subscribers, which, like, I don't know, I can't actually wrap my head around it. It's actually kind of mad. I do really appreciate it, honestly. I think for my patrons, I'm going to post a book haul video for my trip in London. That should already be up by the time that this is up, but anyway. Thank you so much for watching. Oh my gosh, thank you. If you came to the end of this ramble, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye.